Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, Dell's got a new XPS 13. Is Apple going 5 nanometer? AMD's 6-core bargain is the Ryzen AF, and CES is next week, people. All that and more coming up next on Twitch. This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Using the same password everywhere is a security nightmare waiting to happen. LastPass easily creates unique passwords for every site. Visit lastpass.com/twit.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 547, recorded on January 2nd, 2020. Dell XPS 139300 and a 6-core CPU for $85. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch weekly show that aims to bring you all the hardware news. And shockingly, there is a smattering of hardware news, even though we are less than a week away from the Consumer Electronics Show 2020 in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm Patrick Norton, who will be in Las Vegas for CES, joined by PC Purse Editor-in-Chief and Man About Benchmarks, Sebastian PEAK. Sebastian, are you excited to see what happens between Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA at CES 2020?
I'm super excited, Patrick. And, you know, what better way to enjoy it than sitting on my couch at home with my feet up, watching the live stream on my TV, and, you know, typing away on my laptop in the comfort of my own home.
You know, I actually will be avoiding the press days, which I'm very excited about, because really nothing to me says useful like waiting in line for 2 hours to sit in a room for an hour and a half to find out that a company actually didn't have an announcement, but really wanted everybody in the room that day. At least in one case, I can think of that happening where like the product literally, I don't know if it was canceled or died, but essentially they were terrified to reveal their non-functioning demo at CES, and it turned into this very strange improv with journalists in the audience, which is always awkward. Yeah, I'm going to be down there. We're both going to be keeping tabs on what's going on. I'm going to be seeing several vendors and finding out what I can from the CES show floor, and we'll be talking about that in approximately 7 days on January 9th. But right now, let's talk about what's going on end of the year. We've had our sort of end of the year wrap up. There's a last few things coming up this year. And really, the Cinderella CPU company, the turnaround kid, the champion of revenue reversals. AMD stock's now at a 20-year high. They've had a really, really good couple of years. And it's finally showing in their stock price. Should you worry about those kind of things at night?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of amazing to look at this and see. You have to go back literally, if you're looking at stock price, 20 years to see this number. And it's not like amazing. It's like over $45, but it's think about when AMD was trading for less than $5 a share. And it's, if you bought in back then, if you believed back in like literally, we're talking only 2014, 15, the stock was like $2.
Right.
And they had nothing, it seemed, on the CPU side. They were still pretty competitive on the GPU side. They always had something that kind of slotted in somewhere, either high end or mid tier. And now they have just the darling of any DIY. And really, not just because of Intel's struggles with 14 nanometer, we won't even talk about the 10 nanometer stuff. Just their struggles in general to supply companies with processors has opened up even more market share opportunities for AMD. So I think investors see a lot of upside here. There's some kind of, it's seemingly unrelated news we'll talk about. I have in the show notes about this, which actually should affect AMD and their processors a lot in the second half of this year. But yeah, it's just, that was like the first thing today. Like, you know, it's coming. They're going to hit like in pre-hours trading, they went over the 20-year mark for their all-time high stock price. So they're back. If anybody doubted it, now I'm just waiting on those. Yeah, I'm waiting for the GPU side to catch up with the CPU side.
We wait with bated breath. Interesting article you found up on Notebook Check. Quote, the $85 AMD Ryzen 5 1600 AF looks to be a new 12 nanometers M+ part and even outperforms the Ryzen 5 2600.
Isn't that interesting?
This is fascinating and kind of weird.
It's really weird. The first time this came from Reddit, and Notebook Check wrote this up. I've seen this posted before. This AF variant, and you literally have to look at the string like on the CPU itself, look the pictures of the side of the box. So if you have access to a Fry's or a Micro Center or something, you can actually look at the CPU. Because I don't think if you're ordering this on Amazon or Newegg, you're definitely getting an AF variant of this. But if you happen to get one, it's actually a 12 nanometer Zen Plus. And remember, Zen Plus was the 2000 series stuff. So Zen Plus is when we had the Ryzen 5 2600. This is a Ryzen 5 1600. So supposedly first generation, but essentially being made with the second generation architecture. So it's basically a 2600 in the package of a 1600. And the 2000 series stuff, and of course this is getting even more convoluted because we're talking about 3 different product lines. They all have basically the same name. They're all Ryzen 5, but 3 different, slightly different architectures. Zen 2 is really different. Zen and Zen Plus are slightly different. But I kind of went back and forth on this, and I guess the consensus sort of was they're hitting a price point here. It kind of makes sense for them to move to the newer process node and be just Zen Plus and Zen 2. So for them to kind of repackage a Ryzen 5 1600 is really just allowing them to have something occupying that price point, that sub $100 price point. So, and it's, you have Ryzen 3000 stuff that starts at $200. So they need to fill the gap somewhere. And they have those Ryzen with Vega graphics parts, like the 3400G, for example, but they're hitting even more price points with this, which is only going to allow them to gain more market share. So it's interesting. I just wish it was easier to find, like if it was a new processor number, like instead of Ryzen 5 1600 again, if it was like the 1610 or something. So you'd actually know you were buying the part that was faster. And it apparently in some cases, according to this, even outperforms the Ryzen 5 2600. We're talking about an $85 CPU.
That's pretty crazy. And by pretty crazy, I mean pretty awesome.
Yeah, pretty awesome. It's 6 cores and 12 threads for under $100. And we're not talking about some old Xeon or something, because you can buy like those older multi-core parts and it kind of sounds interesting. And I know there are some like outliers, like there's enthusiast sites that put together things like, how bad is this $20 processor? Can I build a gaming PC in 2019, now 2020, with a $25 or $30 Xeon that has 4 or 8 cores? And the answer is usually no. I mean, you can, but the performance is not very good. So at least you're relatively current with your processor architecture if you get this part for about $85.
This is kind of exciting. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. There's also a pretty huge article that came out a couple days ago on AMD, or about basically AMD, interview with AMD CTO Mark Papermaster up on Nantech with Dr. Ian Cutress. And it's kind of crazy to see what's going on. I don't know. I just feel like I'm expecting at least some serious graphics announcements at CES, which may be a ridiculous thing to hope for given kind of everything that's gone on in the last couple of years. But man, what a year for them. I just, we don't gush a lot here. But Zen 3 is almost ready. Zen 4 in development. Zen 5 further out. They're on a 12 to 18 month cadence. Papermaster think that's sustainable. It's I'm very curious, right? To see if they can keep this up and to see if they continue to gain market share. I don't know. I'm excited. I'm apparently really excited listening to myself.
Hey, we can temper the gushing. We can always talk about the graphics side and how every graphics announcement from AMD all year was kind of underwhelming. Because at every step of the way, NVIDIA was either lowering prices or releasing the super cards and then it was a back and forth, and it's really just a matter of value at some point, which one you choose at a certain price level, because one offers something that the other one doesn't have, or one drops $50 after it's announced. So that they have a lot of room to improve on, at least on our side of things. We talk about PC hardware. We love graphics cards. Gaming drives a lot of this side of the business, the enthusiast side of the business. So it's all about GPUs. And 2020 is going to be a crazy year because we're apparently going to have the return of Intel. Way back in the day, Intel basically launched the AGP slot. Like, they were behind AGP full on. They had their own GPU. I think it was the 740, the i740.
Right.
And they're going to have a GPU again. And AMD's going to have new stuff. And I know NVIDIA's going to have new stuff. So,
right.
The year of the GPU. Last year was the year of the CPU. On AMD's side, Intel's side, it was like, hey, look at 14 plus plus and 14 plus plus plus. But
I don't know.
It's hard to talk about Intel without sounding really bitter.
Yeah, I don't have any soothing words. I'm out of soothing words for you. Nothing left to give. Announcement came out this morning. Dell's XPS 13 is getting 10th gen Ice Lake processors, and it's kind of like they're reducing the bezel. It's interesting. They're going to a 16:10 screen ratio on that. And
where is the camera? I'm struggling to find it here. Is it still at the very top? Is it just really tiny?
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, because the last time they did this, last time they had the laptop without as much bezel, the XPS 13, they had put it down at the bottom, the so-called nose cam. And now this is losing that lower bezel. They had previously returned it to the top. Now, we had earlier seen that 13 2-in-1, the XPS 13 2-in-1, which was the first, as far as I know, was the first laptop available with the new 10th generation Intel mobile parts. And that remained one of the few you could order throughout the year. And I want to say that was a Computex announcement. Maybe it was all the way back at last CES. And here we are at CES 2020, and they have the non-2-in-1 version of the XPS 13. Again, with a 10th gen. This is the Core i7 1065 G7, and the G7, if I remember correctly, means that it's Iris Plus, so it's the faster Gen 11 graphics. But it starts at about $1,000. I just look at this though and see, okay, here we have a very nice looking laptop, it's ultra slim bezels on every side. Looks like it's almost all screen. It's following in Apple's footsteps with that 16-inch MacBook Pro that we always end up talking about.
I mean, it's interesting, right? So they changed the screen ratio. They changed the screen ratio. They widened the keyboard. They added a little bit of thickness or support to the aluminum in the lid. They reduced the chin bezel, the bottom bezel, and apparently, along with that tiny camera they had in the previous generation XPS, they managed to squeeze an IR camera in to do Windows Hello facial recognition, which always freaks me out. But I know a lot of people love. So it sounds like they still have the camera hidden at the top.
Okay. So now the camera is actually in the keyboard, just looking straight up your nose directly.
That would be utterly terrifying.
Like you see, that's the fingerprint reader. No, that's a camera directly under your hands.
Just hold it up in front of your face. Yeah, I mean it's they do really good work on this lineup. I'm looking forward to getting hands-on in this at their area at CES. I'm curious what the 16:10 screen ratio is going to feel like. I'm curious about the wider keyboard. There's like a micro SD card slot and 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports on each side. So if you don't have the cables, you'll be getting the cables. Starts at $1,000, $999.99. You can order shipping in January 7th, and they're claiming 19 hours for productivity apps, which I think ends up in a real world 10 to 12 hours in terms of actual battery life performance, which is still not bad given the thing, it's going to weigh probably less than 3 pounds, which is just kind of like, this is exciting and ridiculous and kind of awesome. Mac rumors. The latest rumor on Mac rumors is that Apple's going to be moving to, brace for impact, 5 nanometer chip production in Q2 2020, which
Yes.
you noted frees up some 7 nanometer production. Perhaps Intel could use it.
Well, yeah, maybe Intel could use it, but of course, AMD currently using 7 nanometer as well for both GPUs and CPUs. And at least at the high end, we still had some availability growing pains for some of the new stuff, like the 3900X, which is finally more commonly available at MSRP than the nearly unobtainable 3950X. It's very hard for them to produce. Honestly, it's the most difficult to bin processor product I've ever heard of. Mm-hmm. I'm something of a student of computer history, and I feel like when in history did a company say, okay, we're going to have a new flagship line of products? And obviously you have to bin these out. So these chips come off the wafer, and they're not all going to run at the same speed. So those can go into different products. And sometimes certain cores are defective, quote unquote defective, which probably means they would only run up to a certain lower speed. So then those can just be disabled. And these chiplets all have 8 dies. At least that's how the lithography works. They're all kind of made to have 8 cores, but sometimes only 7 or 6 work, and those can easily become a 6-core part, or 2 of them could be a 12-core part. And with the 3900X, that was a 12-core processor, which could theoretically have 2 6-core parts in it. I don't know if they did an 8 and a 4 or how that works. I would assume it's balanced, but who knows? In theory, you could have a couple different configurations and still hit your 12-core mark. And they had also promised a maximum turbo speed of up to 4.6 gigahertz. With the 3950X, you must have all 8 cores on both chiplets active. And you also must clock it 100 megahertz higher than the 3900X to get to up to 4.7 gigahertz. I could never understand that. I think people would have been very happy to buy a 16-core part that was at the same speed as a 12-core, and really, honestly, lower. Like we've learned over the years to expect lower clock speeds on those super high core count parts because you're buying them for the multi-threaded performance. You're not necessarily buying them for single thread. But AMD, it seemed like their mission was, we want the world's fastest processor for gaming, and that for gaming tagline was all over all of their like any announcement. Anytime Lisa Su was on stage, it was for gaming. Like the first 16 gigabyte graphics processor for gaming, the first 7 nanometer graphics processor for gaming, and then the same thing with the 3950X. So for them to try to not only get 2 fully enabled 8-core chiplets that also clock up to 4.7 gigahertz is kind of mind-boggling. And then add to that the complication of those chiplets could be going into EPYC processors, which cost a heck of a lot more money and have more like higher profit margins. So
we wait.
This became kind of a tangent. Yeah, this became a tangent. You know what? The news is AMD will probably have more 7 nanometer space because TSMC, the fab that makes all their stuff, has also been basically like sharing time with Apple, who's also at 7 nanometer currently. Apple's moving their next architecture to 5 nanometer. AMD is sitting on 7 for now. I think even Zen, if there is a Zen 2 Plus, it'll be at 7 nanometer. So we will probably have greater availability of 7 nanometer parts by the middle of the year, is how I read this.
That sounds pretty reasonable. I mean, it's crazy also when you look at this, because I remember getting a question from somebody. They're like, why did this company fail because Apple didn't sell iPhones? And when you look at this, TSMC has, it was like last year, they pointed out in the Mac Rumors article, they agreed to invest $25 billion in 5 nanometer, in 5 nanometer process technology, just so they could hold on to their contract with AT&T with Apple. And that's a lot of money, That's real money, even if you're Apple or a giant chip manufacturer, or I should say a giant fab. I was just kind of, there's a lot of money going on here to make things like this happen. So, any case, you had your favorite laptop of 2019. What was your pick?
The T490S, actually, of all things. Lenovo ThinkPad. This is in the T series. It's not ultra slim by Apple standards like the MacBook. It's not even as slim as Lenovo's own X series, but it's a lot thinner than the older T series parts, kind of their flagship business laptop back in the day. I remember Ryan using a T series, like 400 series laptop or an X200 series laptop. And these were a little bit bigger. They had full-size connectivity options and things that we're just not used to seeing in what they call a thin and light these days, the former Ultrabook classification of things. And we just talked about that XPS 13, which has only basically space for USB-C ports on the side. I think there's like 2 on one side and a headphone jack. And that's kind of the standard small laptop these days. What was interesting to me about this T490S was the T490 was already a slimmer version of a T-series laptop from Lenovo anyway. And then the T490S was even slimmer, but it didn't lose things like a full-size HDMI out on the side, a regular full-size USB 3.1 port, in addition to a pair of Type-C ports, which included Thunderbolt 3.
Right.
And you even have it technically has a NIC, so you can use regular wired Ethernet with it, but you needed an adapter because they had to use a small port on the side that required an optional adapter. But everything else is there right on the side of the laptop. It's extremely functional. And the thing is, and I used this throughout the summer. I sent this back when I finished my evaluation of it. I'd been kind of sitting on this for a while. But looking back on it, of all the laptops I used, this one kind of had everything because it was thick enough that it had a big battery, but it wasn't so thick that it was hard to move around. It was fairly thin, although they're much thinner laptops, but it was thin enough that it fit in any bag, and it only weighed 2.8 pounds. It was so thin so light when I first picked it up, it almost felt like a shell, like there's no computer in here. And they're strong. Like it felt stronger than the X series parts that I've used, where you could almost flex the lid if you were pushing hard enough. So I like it when there's a little bit more thickness just for rigidity. And the battery life was great. I did 2 different battery tests. PC Mark 10 has a couple or 3 different battery tests in their suite. I didn't do the gaming test on this because it's not a gaming machine. It has just UHD 620 or 630 graphics in it. But the battery test, both of the tests I ran with the brightness cranked up to more than 50%. It was at 180 lux, which is somewhere around 50-60% on this particular machine. 14 hours of battery life, constant.
That's pretty impressive.
Use. Yeah, and they claim up to 20.
And it's a beautiful machine.
Yeah, it is, and it's in that understated way. And I was a long-time user of a ThinkPad myself. Around 2013, 2014, I jumped on the ThinkPad Yoga bandwagon. And so I had the first generation ThinkPad Yoga X1. And while this is not a 360 wraparound hinge design like that one was, it's still like the hinge is like 180 degrees. It folds flat if you want it to. It doesn't have a touch screen. But what it has is virtually the same keyboard. I really liked that keyboard layout. It's full width. The keys feel comfortable. They're all concave on the top, so your fingers sort of rest in them. There's a decent amount of key travel. It's still technically sort of a chiclet style as far as the weight of them and like the overall size and the what is it called, key travel. But it doesn't feel like it. It feels just a little bit more traditional than that. It's hard to explain. And until you use one of these, you don't kind of realize what the deal is. Like, no, this is not the old IBM ThinkPad. No, this is not one of those legendary keyboards that people still swear by that have tons of key travel and feel clicky. But for a modern keyboard, when we have keyboards released that have flat top chiclet keys that all feel exactly the same, that move less than a millimeter before they actuate, and it's a different experience to use one of these. So I really like that. The trackpad is good too. How good can a plastic trackpad be in the age of giant glass trackpads? Yeah, pretty good. It's responsive. The software is good. This doesn't feel laggy. I never felt like I was fighting the trackpad. It just kind of got out of my way, so I didn't think about it anymore, which is ideal for me because I'm extremely picky about trackpads. And it has the the little nub too. I can never remember exactly what they call that. That's the track point, I think. They call the touchpad the Ultra Nav, and they call the nub the track point, I think. And that feels great too. And you have physical buttons for it down below the space bar too. Left and right click buttons, which are just above the track pad itself. So I thought it was great. It was, to me, about as perfect as a business-oriented laptop gets. Super long battery life, really small. 14-inch form factor, but with like small bezels, it's like a 13-inch size. It fits great. You're sitting in coach using a laptop, it fits. You have no issues. So I gave this my like laptop of the year recommendation just from everything I used. And I really liked things like the HP Spectre X360, but it's not, the style of it's a little odd, and it's one of those where it's trying really hard to be a slim aluminum, almost Apple-like design, and it has only USB-C. Well, actually, that one was the exception because it had a single USB 3.1 port on it, but you're still not dealing with full-size video output or the capability of actual like gigabit NIC like this one has. And then the last thing I'll say is the screen. The screen was really great. I actually gave up using my old ThinkPad Yoga S1 because that one had a blinking backlight, like a PWM backlight, where below a certain threshold of brightness, the screen, to lower its brightness, simply blinks the backlight on and off very, very fast. And many, many monitors do this. The first thing, in fact, that I ever asked somebody who's talking about, I get headaches, I have to stare at a computer monitor all day at work. My wife was doing this too, like a year ago, like, I have such a headache from staring at my monitor all day. Like, I bet you have a PWM monitor. So we looked into it. She gave me the model number. Sure enough, she did. And I'm like, take one of these non-PWM monitors that I bought to work with you. Put it in the office. Because unless you set their brightness up to full, it starts to blink more and more and more and more, like slowly. And it would give me a migraine. I finally figured out a couple CESs ago that it was my laptop that was making me feel like I had to die. So these newer ones, no PWM backlight. It's great. The screen is super rich looking. I'm not sure if they're using IGZO or not. I had the low power version. They called it IPS. I think it was Notebook Check that said they thought they were using IGZO. I have no idea. The sub-pixel pattern doesn't match what I thought IGZO was, which is Sharp's technology. It's something I first saw on the Dell XPS 15 a couple years ago. But I call it sort of quasi-OLED, where you have very, very rich color saturation and good contrast ratio, but it's also a lower power technology. So anyway, the only drawback of this, it was $1,700, the one they sent me, which I sent back. It was sad. I had to put it back in the box and send it away. They started around $1,400. This is not a cheap laptop. If you think the XPS 13 at $1,000 is expensive, you're $1,399 and up for this. They do have an AMD variant, and I have seen some lower cost variants of this. I'm not sure if they're the exact same model. I thought I saw these as low as $799, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. You'd lose out on things like probably it would be a lower end processor. It would be non-backlit keyboard.
Right.
But they have a whole bunch of stuff in this T-Series family now. I thought this was great, obviously, and it's almost alarmingly light.
Alarmingly light. The kind of light you've dreamed of. It's good stuff. I kind of lost my mind. We've been watching movies, especially The Mandalorian, which is not a movie. It's a television show based on the Star Wars universe on Disney+. It's been a big, the new episode comes out on Friday. Everybody gets excited. And we've been gathering around a tablet or a laptop to watch that in the Airstream. And I sort of lost my mind a couple days before Christmas because I was near a Best Buy. And I could not find, sadly, I could not find a Series 5, which is available in a 43-inch version, and which is, I will say is a vast improvement over a 10-inch tablet, but still a huge come down from somebody that's used to a big 100-inch projection screen. But I was laughing because, so I snuck this 43-inch Series 4 TV and kind of got it set it up and got everything connected. And it's amazing. Like the thing that still strikes me is this television was like $235 before tax for a 43-inch television, and I was laughing because it's alarming how good it is. There's it's curious, right? Because anything below 55 inches is pretty much an afterthought for TV vendors. All right. Because at this point, you can pick up a Series 5, 55-inch Series 5 Roku for basically nothing. TV manufacturers have not been making money or much money for a long time. And, it's crazy when you realize like a 55-inch 4K UHD television, is somewhere. Well, it looks like they've sold out all the 55s on Amazon. But so, yeah, it looks like they're at the end of the. It looks like they're at the end of the cycle where everything's getting expensive before it gets cheap again. But you're looking at a fairly inexpensive television, and like well under $1,000. And it's crazy to realize, or at least for me, it was kind of crazy to realize how good what amounted to a $250 television was. The HDR is it certainly supports HDR. I don't think there's enough brightness in it or contrast in it to really make HDR particularly effective. Or I should say it's much more striking when you look at a high-end Samsung or LG or an OLED especially. But for 1080p Blu-rays and streaming, it's quite good. It's an LCD, so off-axis viewing, and it's an inexpensive LCD, so off-axis viewing. If you get too far off-axis, there's some pretty massive color shift, like, skin tones or browns will basically turn white and fade out if you're too far off center axis. But given that most vendors just don't have, there's not enough. They make them because they can sell them, but there's so little profit there. They don't really expend much energy on them. It was shocking how good it was, for basically 1080p Blu-ray viewing and streaming. It was also shocking, like Robert and I and AVXL have said for a long time, really the only TV operating system worth a rat's ass is the televisions with Roku, because most of the other ones, and certainly most of the ones that have been built even for high-end televisions by different TV vendors, they haven't received much support. They tend not to get a lot of updates. The app support tends to be miserable. And the Roku, is super cheap, IR remote, but it was responsive, it was snappy, it had all the apps we were looking for, and it's shocking how much you get for so little money. So I'm going to be experimenting with it as a 4K television monitor too, just for the sheer unbridled joy of that. Yeah. But yeah, a 55-inch 5 series television at this point is $380. If you find one in stock at your local Best Buy. The 65-inch is $530. Is it as good as a 55 or 65-inch OLED from LG or the top-of-the-line Samsungs? No, but it's unbelievably good for the money.
And like you
even
said,
the really cheap
just the
TVs
operating
are pretty
system
impressive.
itself. Yeah, just the operating system itself, like you were saying, makes it in some cases more attractive because you can spend all this money, but unless you're prepared to just use it as a monitor and you have your own streaming box and your own source devices, then they are frustrating to use. I have a LG OLED. I bought it 3 years ago, and it's okay. Like the built-in app support is okay. I don't know how long the app
there
support
is built-in app support.
There is. I actually have YouTube on it in some form, and there is Amazon Prime Video and Netflix and some other stuff on it. But for the most part, we use the Apple TV for streaming stuff, and we also have a Roku. And if I could have Roku built into that TV, I probably never would have used an external streaming device. So, and the other thing I'm thinking about while you're talking is TCL. This almost sounds like the Vizio story. A few years ago when Vizio was like, it's not quite as good as buying a Sony or a Panasonic, but it's really good for the money. And then Vizio kind of became a little bit more of a premium brand. And now you have TCL, that's the cheapest good TV at a Best Buy, which is really pretty good. Like, it's not a bad TV at all.
No.
It's probably better than some of the cheaper Samsung TVs.
Probably, and probably even better than some of the middle ground TVs from some of the manufacturers. I mean, it's an industry that's shaken out a lot. at the high end, you really have LG. As I was also kind of fascinated because I saw some really bad burn-in on an LG because they had left a static display on in a store. And that's the first time I ever saw particularly bad burn-in. But it also literally they had left a static display apparently for like 6 months before they realized it may be creating a problem with some burn-in. But again, as long as you're not sitting there with a stock market ticker or a bug of the exact same shape for 20 hours a day on your OLED, you're probably not the problem. But yeah, it's amazing how inexpensive these are. They're considerably low. They're considerably below MSRP listed up at TCL, and they're really good. Are the OLEDs better? Absolutely. They also cost like 4 or 6 or 8 times as much. It's also kind of crazy how light all of the HDTVs are now. 43-inch television used to be a significant lift, and I kind of picked one up with one hand and palmed it, and I was like, well, this is going to be easy to install. So just a thought on that. If you've been thinking about new TVs, they're strikingly good. And, of course, next week at CES, we expect to hear a ton of information from, of course, Samsung, LG, Sony, and all the rest, TCL, and Hisense, and several other vendors with the news for the TVs that won't be available for 6 months, but will be available at some point in 2020. So anything you can tease about what's going on up at PC Purser?
We're just kind of in post-holiday hangover mode here, where I'm wrapping up a few reviews I probably should have done 2 weeks ago, but there was this whole holiday thing. And then we're getting ready for the onslaught that is CES. And I was very sad today when I saw the pre-CES announcements start to come into the mailbox. Like, it's happening. It's happening. I'm not even going to be there this time. We're rare CES off. So it wasn't in the clouds or the cards. Something. It wasn't in something this year. We're not going to be there in person. We're covering it remotely. But that does not mean you don't get a deluge of press releases in your inbox.
That's the spirit.
That's right.
So many. Well, I will keep you posted as to what I see on the ground, anything get my grubby little paws on. Of course, we'll talk about all of the CES now next week. And this is This Week in Computer Hardware. And this is your first episode. You're listening to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. It's a weekly hardware show with Sebastian PEAK and myself. I'm Patrick Norton, and we talk about it each and every week on the Twit network. And that's twit.tv/twitch is the webpage to get all the information on the show, all the feeds, all the older episodes, the video and the audio feeds, or you can just go to your favorite podcatcher and search for This Week in Computer Hardware. So thank you, each and every one of you, for listening. Happy New Year's. We're so glad to have you with us running into 2020. We'll have the CES coverage next week. If you have a question, if you see an announcement, if you're curious about something, do us a favor and email Twitch, TWICH, at twit.tv, and we'll do our best to answer it in the show next week. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Sebastian PEAK.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.